The age of the expert is ending because AI has made knowledge abundant. The people that are really standing out aren't necessarily smarter, they're more relatable and recognizable. The real advantage of your personal brand isn't merely your expertise, it's building a brand that is unmistakably you. So grab your cup of tea and let's talk about how to build a brand that's impossible for others to replicate and connects you with your people. I would propose that a you-coded personal brand is building your personal brand around your worldview, your personality, your presence, and your taste, not merely on your expertise alone. Because adding a you-coded strategy to your personal branding is what is going to make you memorable and distinct and have people actually want to connect with you as a person, not purely for the expertise that you have. And I do still argue that expertise is still really important. If people are going to hire you or to work with you in your business, they want to know that you are credible and that you are competent. So while it is important, it's also remembering that they want to work with people that they feel that they have a connection to. And that is where you need to establish signals that show who you are. It's the you coding that you integrate into every touch point of your personal brand. So it's not just what you think, it's how you think and how you show up that matters. So my first point is cultural capital and world building. While your expertise is important, it's still to a degree one-dimensional. But your cultural capital and your world building that you create as a part of your personal brand is something that is going to add context to your expertise. It's going to show where that comes from. So this is a really important storytelling tool, for example. That's why you see world building in storytelling, in movies, in books, because you don't just want to know the character and what they think. You want to know the context so you can understand why they think and feel in a certain way. And someone who has done this really well, as I just discussed in my recent episode on the idea of cultural capital, because it's become a space that I've increasingly become really fascinated with, is Hailey Bieber and the cultural capital that she built and leveraged when she created and then sold her road business for $1 billion. Cultural capital in this example played a really important part in the success of that brand, because Hailey Bieber, even prior to launching the brand, was able to establish the clean girl and the it girl aesthetic that made the brand so successful. People weren't just buying into the quality of the products. They were buying into what they represented, the lifestyle and the image that she had created in this idea of world building, which is something that she did really intentionally. She talks about this in interviews, how from the start, even before she launched the brand, that this was an intentional strategy. She was creating this world that Rode related to, as opposed to just trying to sell celebrity products. So to give you a little bit of an overview as to what I talked about related to cultural capital in my earlier episode, which you can check out if you are interested in this topic more, is this idea of cultural capital coming from a French sociologist, Pierre Bourdieu, who talked about cultural capital being part of 4 dimensions of capital, so also related to economic, social, and symbolic capital. But cultural capital has 3 types of capital within it as well. So you have embodied cultural capital. So this is essentially about the things that exist within you. Then you have objectified cultural capital. So this relates to the things that you own. And then you have institutional cultural capital. So this relates to the credentials that society recognizes, for example. So, to be clear, particularly in the objectified cultural capital, this isn't about having nice things or having expensive things. This is about understanding why those things are valuable to begin with. It's your cultural context, it's the knowledge that you bring to those scenarios. And it's not just the knowledge that you have, it's how that knowledge is built. So if you think about how you can apply this to your own personal brand, this could show up in how you speak or what you communicate in your personal brand bios, for example, which is something that I'm going to get into in more detail later in this episode as well. So think about cultural capital when you are developing your YouTube videos, your podcast episodes, your TikTok videos, your presentation decks, your Instagram posts, whatever it is. Think about the element of cultural capital that comes into play when it comes to you building your personal brand. So now let's talk about you-coded bios and point of view. As I've talked about on this channel before, a really well-written bio, whether it is for your LinkedIn profile or your business website or your personal brand website, should position you as the guide in the story. And I've done other episodes specifically on writing a less boring bio and what you should really be focusing on when it comes to crafting your bios. So make sure you check out that episode as well. But something to extend on this further is that your bio should really establish your unique point of view and what you might think that others don't. So for example, in my space of personal brand coaching and consulting, I communicate the sweet spot that I occupy in the market by saying in an extract in my own bio, I'm not a PR or social media maverick talking personal branding. Over 15 years in marketing, branding, and communications, I've led teams, brands, and personal brands in entertainment, sport, retail, and education. With a Bachelor of Commerce in Marketing and Management and an MBA from the University of Adelaide, plus a Chartered Institute of Marketing Professional Diploma, my methods blend foundational marketing and business knowledge with real-world, commercially and creatively savvy personal branding strategies. But remember, a key point here is to establish that world building, to create context and to add memorable moments to your bio. So another extract from my bio says, I realize degrees and traditional 9-to-5 thinking only take you so far. So when I'm not coaching and consulting on personal branding, I'm sipping green tea or a glass of South Australian Shiraz and capturing my latest insights through my blog, YouTube, and podcast channels and book reviews. In my downtime, you'll find me deep in the latest Denver Nuggets game or at the piano, where I'm reminded that big visions are built on tiny, intentional details. I've also served as the University of Adelaide MBA alumni president, guest lecturer, and mentor. So what you'll see from this bio is that in a couple of paragraphs, I've conveyed that I am a lifelong learner, that I don't rely purely on my academic credentials that I mentioned earlier. I've conveyed that I'm well read, that I keep up with classic ideas as well as the latest trends. I've conveyed that I practice modern day and culturally relevant marketing. And I've conveyed that I'm a multi-dimensional person with hobbies and interests outside of work. And later in my bio, I also reference some personal relationships that are really important to me and also what I believe about personal branding so that I can connect with clients who share that perspective over the people who have other interpretations of the industry. So the people that connect with those other interpretations can connect with those people, and the people that resonate with mine understand my point of view and my perspective. So next, for a you-coded personal brand strategy, you can't ignore the power of your sense of style and your visual identity. Because your visual identity communicates before you do. It is you embodying your personal brand. It speaks volumes about your personality, about your lifestyle, about your values. So just some of the ways that you coded branding might show up in your visual identity could be your use of colors, it could be textures, silhouettes, accessories, it could be clothing items and styles, it could be your brand direction, photo treatments, and your signature visual editing style. If you do want to learn more about how you can define your sense of style or to elevate your sense of style, then make sure you check out some of the earlier episodes that I've done on this topic, including how to curate your perfect color palette for your personal brand, and also how to elevate your visual identity, particularly using Pinterest. And next, one of the best ways to incorporate you-coded personal branding into your strategy is to define your tone of voice and your verbal identity. A different person can deliver the exact same message and it can land completely differently. And this has to do with your tone of voice. But when you're thinking about your tone of voice from a brand perspective, this is about much more than your pitch or your pacing when you speak. This is about your tone of voice, your language, how you communicate, the brand that you are embodying in your verbal identity. So beyond a visual identity, for example, this is the reason why a brand like Louis Vuitton, for example, sounds so different to a brand like Kmart. It is because they have developed not only their aesthetic, but their tone of voice in a particular way. Now, if you want to define your own tone of voice in a really simple way, 2 steps that you can take is to first identify up to maybe 4 or 5 personality traits related to your brand. How do you feel that your brand is best described in these 4 or 5 words? So for example, is it bold, creative, calm, inspired? Is it relatable, or a combination of those or other things? So then take each of those dimensions and dot point out what that sounds like when you are aligned with those dimensions and what it doesn't sound like. So keep this really simple so you can remember this in your day-to-day communications or in your brand communications. This is going to help you to really define and really land on what that actually means. So you're not just relying on the fluffy words that you attribute to your tone of voice. You fully understand how this is applied in your communication. And if you want to, you can get really specific in how you describe these attributes as well, while keeping it simple. So you might, for example, define that you want to align with Gen Z or trending language. You might define that you want to be traditionally corporate, or that you want to speak in plain English only, or to have elements of Latin or French flair in your communication. Whatever you feel best embodies your personal brand that you want to convey as part of your verbal identity. And a pro tip, if you want to take this even further, is to think of a bank of words that are most relevant in the field that you are in, or to your brand or to your personal brand, and then come up with alternatives to this word. Or you might decide that that is the right word for you and that it aligns with the verbal identity that you want to have. Or you can create a bank of words that essentially have the same meaning but capture the tone of voice that you want to communicate for your personal brand. So saying the same thing in a different way. So for example, you might notice this in brands that are really trying to connect with a Gen Z audience, and they use the lingo or the internet slang that is most popular with them at the time. Whereas this might look quite different to someone who is really trying to connect with a more corporate, traditional audience. They're going to use different language that speaks to that audience. Whatever it is, the best branding is intentional. So make sure that you code your branding with what makes you uniquely you. Thanks so much. Subscribe for more like this, and I'll see you in the next episode.